The distant howl of a coyote echoed through the lonely night as Clara Foster rocked her screaming infant, desperation coursing through her veins like wildfire. The small cabin outside Las Cruces, New Mexico territory, seemed to shrink with each passing moment, the walls closing in as her baby's hungry cries grew more insistent. 3 empty milk bottles sat on the rough-hewn table, a cruel reminder of her failure. It was the summer of 1878, and Clara's world had collapsed around her. She had buried her husband just 2 weeks prior, his body ravaged by typhoid fever that had swept through the area with merciless precision. Robert had been everything to her provider, protector, and the only family she had since leaving Pennsylvania 3 years ago. Now, at 22, Clara found herself utterly alone with a 3-month-old daughter and dwindling supplies in a territory that showed no mercy to the weak. "Hush now, Emma," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she stroked her daughter's flushed cheek. "Mama's trying." The baby's wails continued unabated. Clara's own breasts had failed to produce enough milk since Emma's birth, a source of constant guilt that gnawed at her day and night. Robert had purchased a milk cow before his illness, but the animal had wandered off during the chaotic days of his final fever when Clara couldn't leave his bedside. Clara's eyes burned from lack of sleep as she glanced at the few remaining supplies in the small pantry. A handful of dried beans, some cornmeal, and half a jar of preserved peaches. Nothing to sustain a nursing mother, certainly nothing to help her produce the milk her child so desperately needed. Emma's cries softened into exhausted whimpers. Clara placed her tiny form in the handmade cradle, surrounded by the empty milk bottles she'd been using to feed the baby with precious cow's milk from their neighbors, the Johnsons. "But yesterday, Mrs. Johnson had gently explained they couldn't spare any more, not with their own 5 children to feed." Clara collapsed onto her bed, fully clothed, too tired to even remove her boots. Sleep claimed her for mere moments before a sharp knock at the door jolted her awake. Her hand instinctively reached for Robert's shotgun propped against the wall. Raiders and outlaws weren't uncommon in the territory, especially targeting vulnerable homesteads. "Who's there?" she called, voice steadier than she felt. "Madam, I don't mean to disturb you," came a deep voice, "but I heard a baby crying all the way from the trail. Thought someone might need help." Clara hesitated, the gun heavy in her hands. "State your business, mister." "Name's Blake Patterson, madam. I'm driving cattle north to Colorado." "Just making camp for the night when I heard the little one." Clara cracked open the door, keeping the shotgun visible. The man who stood on her porch was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Trail dust covered his clothes, and behind him she could make out the silhouette of a horse. "Your baby sounds hungry," he said simply, his eyes moving past her to the cradle where Emma had fallen into an exhausted sleep beside the empty bottles. "That's not your concern," Clara said defensively. The cowboy removed his hat, revealing kind eyes and a weathered face that couldn't have been more than 30 years old. "No offense meant, madam. I've got a milk cow with my herd. Your baby could have milk by tomorrow morning." Clara's grip on the shotgun loosened slightly. "Why would you help us?" "You don't know me. My sister lost her husband last year, left her with twins," he explained, his voice softening. "Folks helped her when I couldn't be there. Figure it's my turn to pass that kindness along." Emma stirred in her cradle, her tiny fists clenching as she prepared to wail again. Clara felt the crushing weight of her situation. Pride meant nothing compared to her daughter's hunger. "I can pay you," she offered, though they both knew it was likely a lie. Blake shook his head. "Not looking for payment, madam, just doing what's right." In that moment, as the moon cast long shadows across her porch and her baby began to cry anew, Clara Foster made the decision that would alter the course of her life forever. She lowered the shotgun. "Then I accept your help, Mr. Patterson." Blake nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "I'll be back at first light with milk for your little one." He paused, looking out at the darkness. "If you don't mind my saying, it's not safe for a woman and child alone out here." "We manage," Clara replied, though the tremble in her voice betrayed her. I'll bring one of my men to stand watch tonight, Blake offered, his tone leaving little room for argument. Just on your porch, for safety's sake. Too exhausted to refuse, Clara nodded. As the cowboy departed, she returned to her daughter's side, stroking the wispy hair on her perfect head. Milk tomorrow, she whispered. Just hold on until morning, my love. True to his word, Blake returned at dawn with a small metal canteen of fresh, warm milk. The young cowhand who had kept vigil on her porch tipped his hat respectfully before mounting his horse and riding back toward what Clara assumed was their camp. Clara's hands trembled as she accepted the canteen. Thank you, she said, the words wholly inadequate for what this milk meant to her child. Blake stood awkwardly on her porch, hat in hand. If you'd like, I can bring the cow closer. She's gentle, easy to milk. I could show you how. Clara hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'd appreciate that very much. While Blake fetched the cow, Clara carefully fed Emma with a small cloth dipped in the milk. The baby's eager sucking and the immediate quieting of her cries brought tears to Clara's eyes. By the time Blake returned leading a docile brown and white cow, Emma was sleeping peacefully, milk dotting her tiny lips. She's beautiful, Blake said, nodding toward the baby. What's her name? Emma, Clara replied. She's 3 months old. Blake led the cow to a patch of grass near Clara's small garden plot. This here's Bessie. She's a good producer, gentle temperament. For the next hour, Blake showed Clara how to approach, calm, and milk the cow. His hands were large but moved with surprising gentleness, demonstrating the rhythm needed to coax the milk from the animal. Clara watched intently, determined to master this skill that would keep her daughter alive. Where's your husband, if you don't mind me asking? Blake inquired as they worked. Clara's hands stilled momentarily. Buried behind the cabin, typhoid 2 weeks ago. Blake's expression softened with understanding. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Foster, Clara Foster, she supplied, and thank you. What will you do now? He asked, his voice careful, non-judgmental. Clara straightened her back. Keep going, what other choice is there? Blake nodded, respect evident in his eyes. Well, Mrs. Foster, my herd will be moving on in 3 days. I'd like to leave Bessie with you if you'll have her. Clara's eyes widened. I couldn't possibly accept such a gift. A milk cow is valuable. More valuable to you and your daughter than to me right now, Blake replied. I've got 50 head of cattle to deliver. 1 milk cow won't make a difference to my bottom line, but she'll make all the difference to your little girl. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but she blinked them back, determined to maintain her dignity. I insist on paying you when I can. Blake considered her for a moment. Tell you what, my outfit will be coming back this way in about 2 months. If you're still here, we can discuss payment then. Relief and gratitude overwhelmed Clara. Thank you, Mr. Patterson. I don't know what else to say. Blake, he corrected with a small smile. And you don't need to say anything, Mrs. Foster. Clara, she offered in return. That evening, Blake and 2 of his men helped repair Clara's sagging fence and chopped enough firewood to last her several weeks. She insisted on cooking them a meal, stretching her meager supplies into a humble stew. They ate on her porch as the sun set over the distant mountains. Emma cradled contentedly in Clara's arms, finally full for the first time in days. As the cowboys prepared to leave, Blake lingered behind. We'll be camped about a mile north for the next 2 nights. If you need anything, just fire a shot in the air, Clara nodded, touched by his concern. You've done more than enough already. One more thing, Blake said, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out a small revolver. Do you know how to use one of these? Clara nodded. Robert had taught her to shoot years ago, insisting that every frontier woman should know how to defend herself. Take it, Blake said, offering her the weapon. It's easier to handle than that shotgun, especially with a baby in your arms. Clara accepted the gun, testing its weight. I'll return it when you come back through. Blake smiled, a warm, genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. I'll hold you to that, Clara Foster. For the next 2 days, Blake visited each morning and evening, ostensibly to check on Bessie but clearly also checking on Clara and Emma. He brought small gifts each time: coffee, sugar, a tin of peaches claiming they were surplus from the trail supplies. Clara found herself looking forward to his visits, to the sound of his horse approaching and his deep voice calling a greeting. There was something comforting about his presence, solid and reassuring in a way that made the world seem less threatening. On the evening before his departure, Blake arrived with a small burlap sack. "Seed potatoes," he explained as he handed it to Clara. "They'll grow well in this soil, provide food for winter." Clara accepted the gift, their fingers brushing momentarily. "You've thought of everything." "Not everything," Blake admitted. "I've been worrying about leaving you two alone out here." "We'll manage," Clara assured him. Though her own confidence had wavered during lonely nights, Blake's gaze was direct, honest. "I know you will. You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Clara Foster." In the fading light of dusk, with her baby sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks, Clara felt something stir within her, something she thought had died with Robert. It frightened her, this flicker of warmth when Blake smiled, the way his presence made her feel safe. "When will you return?" she asked, immediately regretting the eagerness in her voice. 6 to 8 weeks, Blake replied. "Depending on the weather and the buyers in Colorado," Clara nodded, forcing a smile. "Emma and I will be fine until then, thanks to you." Blake stepped closer, his expression serious. "Clara, I'd like to write to you while I'm gone. Would that be acceptable?" The request surprised her, sending a flutter through her chest. Correspondence between unmarried men and women wasn't entirely proper, but then again, nothing about her situation was conventional. "I'd like that," she admitted softly. "And when I return, perhaps we could discuss your future, and Emma's." Blake's voice was careful, measured. "These lands are no place for a woman alone, no matter how capable." Clara stiffened slightly. "Are you suggesting I abandon my husband's homestead?" "No," Blake clarified quickly. "I'm suggesting you might consider options for safety and security." Before Clara could respond, Emma began to fuss. She excused herself to tend to her daughter, grateful for the interruption. Blake's implications unsettled her, not because they were unwelcome, but because they awakened possibilities she wasn't ready to contemplate. When she returned to the porch, Blake was preparing to leave. "I've left instructions with my foreman to send a man to check on you every few days," he said. "His name is Charlie, trustworthy fellow. He'll bring supplies and help with any heavy work." Clara wanted to refuse, to assert her independence, but practicality won out. "Thank you, Blake, for everything." He mounted his horse, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Take care of yourself, Clara Foster, and that beautiful daughter of yours." As she watched him ride away, Clara felt both relief and a peculiar sense of loss. She had only known Blake Patterson for 3 days, yet his departure left a hollow feeling in her chest. "It's just gratitude," she told herself firmly as she went inside. "Nothing more." But that night, as Emma slept peacefully beside her, Clara found herself remembering the warmth in Blake's eyes and wondering what options he might propose upon his return. The weeks following Blake's departure fell into a rhythm Clara hadn't experienced since Robert's death. Each morning, she would milk Bessie while Emma lay wrapped in a blanket nearby. The cow produced more than enough milk for Emma, with surplus that Clara could turn into butter and simple cheese. True to Blake's word, Charlie appeared every few days, a taciturn man in his 50s who would tip his hat, ask if she needed anything, then set about repairing whatever needed fixing without being asked. He brought supplies: flour, coffee, salt, claiming they were sent by the boss, though Clara suspected Blake was paying for them out of his own pocket. In late July, the first letter arrived, delivered by Charlie. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. "Dear Clara," it began in a surprisingly neat hand. Blake described the cattle drive, the towns they passed through, the beauty of the Colorado mountains. He inquired after Emma and Bessie, asked if the potatoes were growing well. The letter was respectful, friendly, revealing a thoughtful mind behind the cowboy exterior. "I find myself thinking of you and Emma often," the closing lines read. "I hope this doesn't offend your sensibilities, but your strength and grace have made a lasting impression. Until we meet again, Blake Patterson." Clara read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it and tucking it into her Bible. That night, by lamplight, she penned a response, describing Emma's growth, the vegetables flourishing in her garden, the repairs Charlie had made to the roof. She hesitated over the closing, finally settling on "with grateful regards, Clara Foster." 2 weeks later, another letter arrived, and another 2 weeks after that. Each exchange grew more personal, more revealing. Blake wrote of losing his parents young, being raised by his older sister, his dreams of someday owning land in the fertile valleys of Colorado. Clara shared memories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her journey west with Robert, her fears and hopes for Emma's future. "I've never told anyone these things," she admitted in her 4th letter. "It's strange how easier it is to confide in paper than in person." Blake's response came swiftly. "Perhaps it's because letters can't interrupt or judge. But I promise when I return, I'll listen just as carefully in person as I do to your written words." August turned to September, and with it came an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Thomas Gentry from Las Cruces arrived one afternoon, his expression grim as Clara invited him in for coffee. "Mrs. Foster," he began, turning his hat in his hands, "I'm afraid I have some troubling news. Land speculator named James Blackwell has been filing claims on abandoned homesteads. Says your husband's been dead over a month, which makes this property available for claim." Clara's blood ran cold. "This is my home, Sheriff. My husband built it with his own hands." The sheriff nodded sympathetically. "I understand, madam, but the law's tricky. Technically, the claim was in your husband's name without a male relative or a new husband. Your right to remain could be contested." "That's absurd," Clara protested, anger rising. "I've maintained this land. The crops are growing, the fences mended. And I can testify to that," the sheriff assured her. "But Blackwell has friends in the territorial offices. He's targeting widows specifically, offering them a pittance to leave quietly. And if I refuse," Sheriff Gentry's expression darkened, "his men have been known to make life difficult. Accidents happen, fires, damaged wells, livestock gone missing." Clara thought of Emma, of the life they were building. "When will he come?" "Soon, I expect. He's working his way through the valley." The sheriff rose to leave. "I'll do what I can to delay him, Mrs. Foster, but you might want to consider your options." Options, the same word Blake had used. Clara thanked the sheriff and watched him ride away, her mind racing. That night, she wrote the most difficult letter yet to Blake, explaining the situation in detail. "I won't be driven from my land," she wrote firmly, "but I fear for Emma's safety. I understand now what you meant by options, and I find myself wishing you were here to discuss them." She sealed the letter and gave it to Charlie the next day, along with a verbal message urging speed. The old cowhand nodded grimly, promising to find the fastest rider to deliver it. 10 days passed with no response. Clara took to sleeping with Blake's revolver under her pillow, jumping at every sound in the night. She considered fleeing to Las Cruces but rejected the idea immediately. This land was Emma's inheritance, her future. Clara would not be frightened away. On the 12th day, as Clara was hanging laundry on the line, 3 riders approached. Their expensive clothes and clean-shaven faces marked them as businessmen, not cowboys or farmers. The man in front, portly with an ostentatious gold watch chain across his vest, smiled without warmth as he dismounted. "Mrs. Foster, I presume? James Blackwell, at your service." Clara stood her ground, one hand on the revolver tucked in her apron pocket. "This is private property, Mr. Blackwell." "Well, that's what I've come to discuss." His tone was falsely sympathetic. "I understand you've suffered a loss, terrible thing, and now you're all alone trying to manage this modest operation." "I'm managing just fine," Clara replied coolly. Blackwell's smile tightened. Be that as it may, the territorial office has concerns about a claim this size being maintained by a widow. I'm prepared to offer you $50, a generous sum for a quit-claim deed. Enough to get you back east to family, I should think. I have no family in the east and no intention of selling, Clara stated firmly. My husband's claim is legal and current. Blackwell's friendly facade slipped slightly. Mrs. Foster, be reasonable. A woman alone cannot hope to meet the improvement requirements for final proving. The law is quite clear. The law says I have 5 years from the initial claim to prove up, Clara interrupted. We're only in year 3 and the improvements are on schedule. Technicalities, Blackwell dismissed with a wave of his hand. The reality is these lands are opening for development. The railroad's coming through. This will be valuable property, but it needs proper management. He stepped closer. $75, my final offer. Clara drew the revolver and held it steady. My final answer is no. Now kindly remove yourself from my property. The 2 men flanking Blackwell tensed, hands moving toward their own weapons. You're making a mistake, Mrs. Foster, Blackwell warned, his voice hardening. Things happen to stubborn widows out here. Accidents, fires. It would be a shame if something happened to you or that baby of yours. Are you threatening me, Mr. Blackwell? Clara's voice remained steady despite her racing heart. Consider it friendly advice, he replied, mounting his horse. I'll give you 1 week to reconsider. After that, I can't guarantee your safety. As they rode away, Clara's hands began to tremble. She returned to the cabin and gathered Emma into her arms, holding her close as fear and anger warred within her. She had no doubt Blackwell would make good on his threats. Men like him always did. That night, after Emma was asleep, Clara wrote another letter to Blake, detailing Blackwell's visit and threats. She didn't expect a response in time. Blake was likely still in Colorado, but writing to him calmed her frayed nerves. The next morning, Charlie arrived earlier than usual, his normally impassive face tight with concern. Mrs. Foster, you need to prepare, he said without preamble. Blackwell's men burned out the widow Jenkins 3 miles south last night. She barely got out with her children. Clara's heart sank. When, middle of the night, they're moving faster than anyone expected. Charlie removed his hat. I can stay, but I'm just one man. If they come in force. Clara made a decision. Help me pack essentials. We'll go to Las Cruces, seek protection from the sheriff. They worked quickly, loading a small wagon with clothing, food, Blake's letters, and Robert's few valuables. Clara strapped Emma to her chest in a sling and took one last look at the cabin she and Robert had built with such hope. I'll come back, she promised silently. This isn't over. They had just finished hitching the wagon when the sound of approaching horses reached them. Many horses, coming fast. Get behind me, Charlie ordered, drawing his rifle. Clara clutched Emma tighter, her free hand on Blake's revolver. But as the riders came into view, her fear transformed into disbelief. Leading a group of at least 15 armed cowboys was Blake Patterson, his face grim with determination. Behind the men came a chuck wagon and what appeared to be supplies for an extended stay. Blake dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, striding toward Clara with purpose. Are you hurt? Is Emma safe? We're fine, Clara managed, stunned by his sudden appearance. How did you got your letter 8 days ago? Blake explained. Rode day and night. Met Charlie's messenger on the road with your second letter. His eyes darkened. Where's Blackwell now? Unknown, Charlie answered. But his men burned out the Jenkins place last night. Blake's jaw tightened. Madam, we need to get you and Emma somewhere safe while we deal with this. Clara straightened her spine. This is my home, Blake. I won't be driven from it. I'm not suggesting you abandon it, Blake clarified. But a confrontation's coming and a baby shouldn't be in the middle of it. Before Clara could respond, one of Blake's men called out a warning. A cloud of dust on the horizon announced approaching riders. Inside, Blake ordered, gesturing toward the cabin. Charlie, get Mrs. Foster and the baby to safety. The rest of you positions around the property. Clara found herself being ushered into her own home as Blake's men spread out with military precision. Through the window, she watched Blake and 3 others stand their ground in front of the cabin, weapons visible but not yet drawn. Blackwell rode at the head of about a dozen men, his face purpling with anger when he saw the defense arranged against him. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, reining in his horse. Blake stepped forward. "James Blackwell, who's asking?" Blackwell sneered. "Blake Patterson. I represent the interests of Mrs. Foster and this property." Blackwell laughed derisively. "Do you now? And what gives you that authority?" Blake's voice carried clearly through the morning air. "Mrs. Foster has agreed to partner with my outfit. We've entered a formal business arrangement to develop this land jointly." Clara's breath caught in her throat. This was news to her, but she recognized Blake's strategy immediately. Blackwell wasn't fooled. "A convenient claim. Where's the documentation?" "Being filed in Las Cruces as we speak," Blake lied smoothly. "My lawyers are very thorough." "Your lawyers," Blackwell repeated skeptically. "A cowhand with lawyers, how impressive." "Patterson Cattle Company," Blake corrected. "We run 5,000 head across 3 territories, Mr. Blackwell. Our legal affairs are in order, I assure you." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Blackwell's face. "This changes nothing." "The widow's claim is still technically vulnerable." "Not anymore," Blake interrupted. "Not with capital investment and additional labor improving the property, as I'm sure your lawyers will confirm." The standoff continued for several tense moments. Finally, Blackwell jerked his horse around. "This isn't over, Patterson." "For your sake, I hope it is," Blake replied evenly. "Because the next time you or your men come near this property or threaten Mrs. Foster or her child, you'll answer to me personally." After Blackwell and his men retreated, Blake entered the cabin, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. "I apologize for speaking on your behalf, Clara." It seemed the quickest way to make him back down. "You have 5,000 cattle?" Clara asked incredulously. A smile tugged at Blake's mouth. "Well, no, more like 800, but he doesn't know that." Relief and gratitude overwhelmed Clara. She stepped forward and embraced Blake impulsively, Emma sandwiched safely between them. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. Blake's arms came around her gently. "I came as fast as I could." Clara pulled back slightly, suddenly aware of their proximity. "How long can you stay?" "As long as necessary," Blake replied firmly. "I've left my foreman to deliver the herd. My place is here until this matter is resolved." Over the next 2 weeks, Blake's men established a rotating watch over the property. Some began making significant improvements, reinforcing the barn, digging a new well closer to the house, expanding the garden plot. Blake himself seemed to be everywhere at once, directing work, consulting with a lawyer he'd brought from Las Cruces, and still finding time each day to sit with Clara and Emma on the porch as the sun set. "You didn't have to do all this," Clara said one evening as they watched his men construct a new corral. "The legal protection would have been enough." "The legal protection is meaningless without the physical improvements to back it up," Blake explained. "Besides, you and Emma deserve a proper home, not just a shelter." Clara studied his profile in the fading light. "Why are you doing this, Blake? Really?" He turned to face her, his expression serious. "You know why." "Tell me anyway," Clara insisted softly. Blake took a deep breath. "Because from the moment I heard your baby crying and saw you standing there, so fierce and protective despite your fear, something changed in me. I couldn't stop thinking about you both, wondering if you were safe, if Emma was thriving." He looked down at his hands. "I've never felt this way before." Clara's heart pounded. "Blake, I'm not sure I'm ready. Robert's only been gone a few months." "I know," he said gently. "I'm not asking for promises, Clara, just possibility, a chance to see where this might lead." Emma stirred in Clara's arms, and Blake reached out tentatively to touch the baby's cheek. The tender gesture brought tears to Clara's eyes. "We're a package deal," she warned. "Emma will always come first." "I would expect nothing less," Blake assured her. "She's part of why I'm here." Clara leaned slightly closer. "And the other part?" Blake's smile was warm, his eyes never leaving hers. The other part is sitting right in front of me, being braver than anyone has a right to expect. In that moment, with the setting sun painting the world in gold and her daughter secure in her arms, Clara made another life-changing decision. She closed the distance between them and placed a soft kiss on Blake's cheek. "Possibility," she whispered. "I think I can manage that." Blake's smile widened, but he made no move to rush her. Instead, he simply took her free hand in his, and together they watched the sunset over the land that was becoming truly theirs. The confrontation with Blackwell wasn't over, however. 3 days later, Sheriff Gentry rode out to inform them that Blackwell had filed a formal complaint with the Territorial Land Office, claiming Blake and Clara were perpetrating fraud. "He's demanding an official inspection," the sheriff explained over coffee at Clara's table. "Says the partnership is a sham to circumvent the law." Blake remained calm. "When will the inspector arrive?" "Next week sometime." "Fellow named Hargrove from Santa Fe." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Word is he's in Blackwell's pocket." Clara exchanged a glance with Blake. "Then we'll have to make sure our arrangement appears absolutely legitimate." After the sheriff departed, Blake paced the small cabin. "We need to formalize our partnership immediately. I'll ride to Las Cruces tomorrow, have the papers drawn up properly." Clara watched him, a thought forming that both frightened and exhilarated her. "There's a simpler solution." Blake stopped pacing. "What's that?" "Marriage," Clara said plainly. "No one could question your right to be here if we were married." Blake stared at her, clearly stunned by the suggestion. "Clara, I don't want you to marry me just to keep your land." "Is that the only reason you'd marry me?" she countered. "You know it isn't," he replied softly, "but this is too important to rush." "Marriage is a partnership," Clara finished for him, "like the one we've already begun." She stepped closer. "I'm not proposing out of desperation, Blake. These past weeks have shown me what kind of man you are: honorable, kind, someone who sees Emma and me as people to protect, not burdens to bear." Blake took her hands in his. "Are you certain? What about time to mourn Robert properly?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I'll always love Robert. He gave me Emma this home, but he's gone, and Emma and I are still here, still living." She squeezed his hands. "I don't want to wait for happiness when it's standing right in front of me." Blake raised one hand to cup her cheek. "I wanted to court you properly, give you time." Clara leaned into his touch. "We can have a lifetime for courting, Blake Patterson. Right now, we need to secure Emma's future." Blake searched her eyes for a long moment, then nodded. "Then marry me, Clara Foster. Not just for the land or for Emma, but because I've fallen in love with your strength, your kindness, your stubborn determination." Clara's heart soared at his words. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll marry you." The next day, Blake rode to Las Cruces with 2 of his men. They returned that evening with the circuit preacher, a marriage license, and to Clara's astonishment, a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," Blake explained as they stood on the porch, the setting sun their witness. "My sister kept it for me, said I'd know when it was time to pass it on." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" "Never been more certain of anything," Blake assured her. They were married at sunset, with Emma in Clara's arms and Blake's men standing as witnesses. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, the preacher clearly moved by the obvious affection between the couple despite their hasty arrangement. "By the power vested in me," he concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." When Blake kissed her, gentle and reverent, Clara felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This wasn't how she had imagined finding love again, but then, life on the frontier rarely followed expected paths. That night, after Emma was asleep and Blake's men had tactfully made themselves scarce around a distant campfire, the newly married couple sat on the porch, hands entwined. "I promise to be a good husband to you," Blake said softly, "and a father to Emma if you'll let me." Clara squeezed his hand. "She already loves you. I've seen how she watches you, how she quiets when you speak." Blake's expression grew serious. "There's something I need to tell you, Clara, about my past." Clara tensed. "What is it?" "I was married before," he admitted. 6 years ago, briefly. She died in childbirth along with our son. Understanding bloomed in Clara's heart. That's why you stopped when you heard Emma crying that first night. Blake nodded, pain evident in his eyes. I couldn't ride past, not when I heard that sound. It was like being given a second chance to help. Clara rested her head on his shoulder. I'm so sorry for your loss, Blake. I never thought I'd want to try again, he confessed, until I met you and Emma. Clara turned her face up to his. We're both starting over together. When Blake kissed her this time, there was nothing hesitant about it. Clara responded with equal fervor, all the emotions of the past month's grief, fear, hope, and new love pouring into their embrace. Later, as they lay together in the darkness of what was now their bedroom, Blake whispered, "Tomorrow we begin building our future. Together." Clara curled against his side, feeling truly safe for the first time since Robert's death. "It's already begun," she murmured. Land Inspector Hargrove arrived 5 days later, a thin, officious man with a perpetual frown. He scrutinized the marriage certificate with obvious disappointment, then spent hours examining the property improvements, taking meticulous notes. "The partnership claim has been rendered moot by your marriage," he finally admitted grudgingly. "As Mrs. Patterson, you legally inherit your late husband's claim, and your new husband has every right to continue the improvements." Clara and Blake maintained straight faces until Hargrove departed, then collapsed into relieved laughter. "The look on his face when you showed him our marriage certificate," Clara giggled. "Blackwell must be fuming," Blake added, pulling her close. The victory celebration was short-lived, however. That night, a rider from Las Cruces brought news that Blackwell had been seen gathering men at the saloon, making threats against Blake specifically. "He's saying you humiliated him," the messenger reported. "Says he's going to teach you a lesson." Blake's expression hardened. "Clara, I want you and Emma to stay with Sheriff Gentry's family tomorrow. I'll deal with Blackwell." "No," Clara refused firmly. "I won't have you facing danger alone because of us. Clara, be reasonable." "If Blackwell comes in force, then we'll face him together," she insisted. "This is our home, Blake, our future. I won't hide while you defend it alone." Blake recognized the determination in her eyes and knew argument was futile. Instead, he gathered his men, established defensive positions around the property, and prepared for confrontation. It came at dawn the next day. Blackwell led at least 20 men toward the homestead, their intentions clear from the weapons they carried openly. Blake positioned Clara and Emma inside the root cellar, despite her protests, with strict instructions to stay hidden. The ensuing standoff was tense, with Blackwell demanding Blake come out alone to settle things man to man. "This ends now, Patterson," Blackwell called from beyond the fence line. "You've interfered in my business for the last time." Blake stood on the porch, rifle ready but not raised. "There's nothing to settle, Blackwell. The land office has recognized our claim. It's over." "Nothing's over until I say it's over," Blackwell raged. "I've got plans for this valley, and no upstart cowboy is going to ruin them." What might have escalated into bloodshed was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Gentry with 10 deputized men. The sheriff rode directly between the opposing groups, his badge gleaming in the morning sun. "That's enough, Blackwell," he called firmly. "I've got arrest warrants for you and 3 of your men for the arson at the Jenkins place." Blackwell's face contorted with fury. "You can't prove anything." "Mrs. Jenkins' 12-year-old son identified your foreman," the sheriff replied calmly. "And I expect he'll testify against you to save his own neck." The standoff dissolved into confusion as Blackwell's men, seeing the tide turn, began to drift away from their employer. Within minutes, Blackwell found himself virtually alone, his schemes collapsing around him. "This isn't justice," he sputtered as the sheriff approached to arrest him. "It's conspiracy. Patterson has corrupted the entire territory." "The only corruption here was yours," Sheriff Gentry replied, securing Blackwell's wrists with handcuffs. "Targeting widows, threatening families, that ends today." As Blackwell was led away, Clara emerged from hiding, Emma secure in her arms. She joined Blake on the porch, watching the sheriff and his posse depart with their prisoner. "Is it really over?" she asked softly. Blake put his arm around her shoulders. "Blackwell's finished in this territory. His backers will abandon him once word of his arrest spreads." "Then we're safe," Clara breathed, leaning into his embrace. "Truly safe." Blake kissed the top of her head, "and free to build the life we want." In the months that followed, the Patterson homestead flourished. Blake's cattle operation expanded, with the original cabin becoming the headquarters of a growing ranch. Emma took her first steps in the garden Clara had planted, chasing butterflies under the watchful eyes of both her mother and the man who had become her father in every way that mattered. Word came in late November that Blackwell had been convicted of multiple charges and sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison. The news brought final closure to the threats that had haunted their early days together. As Christmas approached, Blake surprised Clara with plans for a new, larger home to be built adjacent to the original cabin. "We'll need the space," he explained as they reviewed the drawings he'd commissioned from a proper architect in Santa Fe. Clara raised an eyebrow. "Are you planning to expand the herd again?" Blake smiled, taking her hand and placing it gently on her stomach. "I was thinking more about expanding the family." Clara's eyes widened. "How did you know I was going to tell you tonight?" "You've been glowing for weeks," Blake admitted. "And you've been feeding Emma at the table while you run outside every morning." His eyes shone with emotion. "Are you happy about it?" Clara's answer was to throw her arms around his neck, tears of joy streaming down her face. "So happy," she whispered. "Emma will have a brother or sister." "And we'll have another miracle," Blake added, his voice thick with emotion. That Christmas Eve, as snow dusted the desert landscape around their home, Clara and Blake sat before the fire, Emma sleeping peacefully in her new bed. Clara leaned against her husband's chest, his hand resting protectively over the new life growing within her. "I never expected this," she confessed. "When Robert died, I thought my life was over, just survival for Emma's sake." Blake kissed her temple. "And I never thought I'd find love again after losing Sarah and our son." He turned Clara to face him. "But here we are," Clara echoed, touching his face tenderly. "A family born from empty milk bottles and a cowboy's kindness." Blake smiled, remembering that first night. "I meant what I said then. Your baby slept beside empty bottles and I promised you'd have milk by morning." "You gave us so much more than milk," Clara whispered. "You gave us hope, a future." "And you gave me purpose again," Blake replied. "A reason to build something lasting." Outside, the stars shone brilliantly over the New Mexico territory, silent witnesses to the love that had bloomed in the most unexpected circumstances. Inside the warm cabin, Clara Foster Patterson said a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances and the cowboy who had brought them. 7 months later, Clara gave birth to a healthy son they named Robert Blake Patterson, honoring both the past and the present. Emma, now a sturdy toddler of 20 months, peered curiously at her brother, solemnly promising to help Mama with the baby. The new house was completed just in time for the birth, a spacious home with room for the growing family. Blake's cattle business prospered, with 3 of his original cowboys settling permanently as ranch hands. Clara's garden expanded into a proper farm plot, producing vegetables that she sold in Las Cruces for a tidy profit. On the first anniversary of their marriage, Blake presented Clara with a journal bound in soft leather. "For our story," he explained. "So our children will know how we found each other." Clara opened it to find their letters carefully pasted on the first pages, followed by blank sheets waiting to be filled. "Where should I begin?" she asked, pen poised. Blake smiled, gathering Emma onto his lap while Clara cradled their son. "Start with the night a baby's cry stopped a cowboy in his tracks." Clara wrote the first line. "Her baby slept beside empty bottles. The cowboy said, 'You'll have milk tomorrow morning.'" Neither of us knew then that those words would change our lives forever. As the sun set over their land, casting long shadows across the prosperous homestead that had once teetered on the edge of loss. Clara looked at her family, the daughter who had given her reason to persevere, the son who represented new beginnings, and the husband who had ridden into their lives with milk and hope when they needed it most. "I love you," she told Blake, her heart full. "And I love you," he replied, his eyes reflecting the depth of his feelings. "Until the end of my days." In the years that followed, the Patterson Ranch became one of the most successful in the territory. They added 2 more children to their family, twin girls named Sarah and Hope, born 3 years after their son. Emma grew into a capable young woman with her mother's determination and her adoptive father's kindness. Young Robert inherited Blake's affinity for cattle and land management, while the twins developed Clara's green thumb and artistic sensibilities. The original cabin remained standing at the heart of the ranch, preserved as a reminder of where their journey began. And on quiet evenings, Blake and Clara would often sit on its porch, hands entwined, watching the sunset over the land that had nearly been lost, but instead became the foundation of a legacy built on love, courage, and a cowboy's promise of milk by morning.